perfect world, and it is on NCLEX, you know, this is team nursing, you have an RN, an LPN, and a UAP in your staff for everything you're doing, that's what you have. But, so it allows the delegator, it enhances skills, abilities of delegate, but it also, everything surrounds patient safety. Why is it doing that? Indirect care is, again, intended to achieve thorough work of someone supervised by, through work of someone supervised by nurses. Nurses ask another person to perform a task or skill, not part of that person's regular assigned work. That's the indirect care. Nurses transfer responsibility for tasks to delegate, but not accountable for tasks. But if you delegate, if an RN, the charge nurse, delegates, because they just do the assignment, so still that's delegation, you're going to be somewhat held as responsible, but that's still, you're delegating to an RN. So if you're the charge nurse, I would always cover myself. If you're the charge nurse, for instance, like this psych nurse that's not doing a very good job, that charge nurse could say, well, you know, they knew this when they hired her, but it is up to that charge nurse to report. It's up to every nurse to report unsafe care. But if that nurse did do something to harm a patient unintentionally or intentionally, that charge nurse might be held responsible, and this is what I always said. I told you about Iris and Eileen, that they were not safe. And so the same thing with this person, and this is what the charge nurse was doing the day that my friend told me about, that they went to the nurse manager and said, you know, I'm in charge, and this is she's an RN, but she's not performing safe care, she's negligent. What does the Nurse Practice Act say about delegation? Remember the 5 rights of delegation? The right task. You would not want to delegate obtaining a sterile specimen of any kind to a UAP, because they cannot collect sterile specimens. They can collect non-sterile specimens, and once you collected a specimen of high importance, they can transfer it, but they cannot collect a sterile specimen. So you would know that's not the right task for that person. Under the right circumstances, so the right circumstances comes down to, is the patient stable or unstable? If the patient is stable, you know, UAP and LPN. If the patient is unstable, the RN has to take care of that patient. And again, it goes back to the right person. Stable versus stable, unstable versus task, in that you, the LPN or the RN, could obtain the urine specimen from the catheter, but the UAP cannot get a sterile specimen. They can't change sterile dressings, they can't assess anything. And then the right direction and communication. So, you know, you would tell the techs, and I'm sure the nurses do. I've heard somewhere that they won't even let the techs get the blood pressure, the vital signs anymore, because there's been such a high incidence of falsifying vital signs. And wouldn't you want to check the blood pressure, and heart rate if they're not on telemetry? I love the telemetry boxes at Gadsden Regional, because you can press the button and you can see the telemetry on the button in the room. You can't see it well enough to, do a lot of judgment, but you can see that it's sinus rhythm or AFib or, what the heart rate is if you're given a beta blocker, calcium channel blocker, or a DIG. So that communication would be, if you're, and I have to do this to my students, believe it or not, if you get vital signs and their blood pressure is below 90 systolic, let me know. If their respiratory rate is above 20, let me know. If they're febrile, let me know. Now, with their heart rhythm, that's going to be on telemetry. But if their vital signs are unstable, let me know. And then if they come to me with a blood pressure or anything that's not stable, then I'm going to go check on it again and then notify the nurse if I can find them. And then again, under the right supervision with the right evaluation. So, this is very important, don't y'all think? And you already learned this in 115. So, you better make your flashcard if you don't remember it. The Nurse Practice Act. Has anybody ever gone and looked at the Nurse Practice Act, State Board of Nursing? Looked over it well? It is a state law enacted by, each state has one. And they're pretty much within the same limits in every state, but if you're going to another state, I would look to see another state to practice what their Nurse Practice Act is. So the State Practice Act, two essential stated purposes: protecting, and of course that's why when you pass the NCLEX, you are qualified at the minimal level of safety. And that all came about to protect the public. That is the purpose of nurses having to have a license, and that is the purpose of the Nurse Practice Act, to protect the safety of the general public. What else does the Board of Nursing do besides the State Practice Act and regulate nursing? They regulate schools of nursing also. So I downloaded just a sample of the Nurse Practice Act and Standards of Nursing Practice, and this is the chapter in the Nurse Practice Act Administrative Code. Assessment, focus, and appraisal of a patient's status and specific complaint from observation and collection of objective and subjective data by the registered nurse or LPN. So LPNs can do a focused assessment. Now, that focused assessment should be on a pretty much stable patient. So if it's a focused assessment on someone who's been reported as having, so I'm in the ICU working. Here's another example of Iris and Eileen. So Eileen comes to me and says, "Will you come look at my patient's hand? There's something wrong with it." So I go into the patient's room, and yeah, there was something wrong with it. It was black, and it had all the P's of pulselessness, except there was another additional P. It was purple black. So what are the 5 P's? Pain, pulse, pallor, paresthesia, pulselessness. Well, the 6th one was purple. So everything. So I go out and call a surgeon on call, because what had happened respiratory had come in, and that's why now, when someone is on the ventilator, they're gonna have an arterial line just to keep that patient from being stuck so many times for blood gases. In addition, the arterial line is a very accurate blood pressure. But the patient had been stuck so many times that it occluded the radial artery. So what does that tell you? Someone never did the Allen's test to make sure the ulnar artery would supply that hand. So she had to go to surgery. They did not have to amputate the hand. They got the color back to it, but she lost, there was so much nerve damage she could not move that hand. So, she was another RN, and I had assigned her that patient, but I was not going to take accountability for that, and didn't, because she's another RN, and she had more experience than me. But they couldn't make her a charge nurse because she was too busy in the nurses' conference room smoking, and she would come in and look like the Wicked Witch of the West. Not that looks matter, but she just came in, looked like she just took her uniform and just pulled it out of the previous pile that she put it in and put it on, and had no personality. But anyway, I did not take responsibility for that, other than being the charge nurse and assigning Iris and Eileen, and of course those two are the reason that I stopped being a charge nurse. So the assignment, licensed nurse, the transfer of responsibility and accountability for nursing activities from one licensed nurse to another. So that would be the RN to RN, say the charge nurse. And then, but you're never going to hear the term charge nurse, you're just delegating. There's one LP, one RN, one LPN, and one UAP, and what are the duties that you can delegate to the UAP or to the LPN, or which patients must the RN take. And of course, they're going to be the unstable patients, but we'll talk about that. So again, the licensed nurse making the assignment retains accountability for accurate and timely completion and outcome of tasks, supervision, and follow-up. So to the UAP, did you get all of the vital signs at 11 o'clock? Yes. What were the vital signs? And they read them out. Or were there anybody that their blood pressure was low or whatever? Of course, they'll give them a list of vital signs, or they may even go ahead and put them in document them in the EHR. So that delegation is the act of authorizing a competent individual to perform selected nursing activities supporting to registered nurses or licensed practical nurses in selected situations while retaining accountability for the outcome if the delegation is to an unlicensed individual. So you notice it says while attaining accountability for the outcome if the delegation is to an unlicensed individual. So that's where you really have to watch for the UAP. And again, you wouldn't want to assign an LPN someone in the perfect world of NCLEX that's like receiving TPN. Why? It involves a lot of assessment of that IV, and then also when TPN is to be hung, it has to be, it's almost like blood, except you don't have to do the vital signs following up, but two nurses have to, and the LPN can be the nurse that checks, but the RN has to hang TPN, it's going through a central line. And another thing that y'all have got to get out of your brain is that when LPNs get out of, when they pass their licensure, the hospitals can train them to start IVs, to give IV medications. They cannot give any anti-arrhythmic medications. But the hospital can train them to give simple medications and to give IVs. But in the perfect world of NCLEX, LPNs can't do that. They do not get that responsibility until they pass the NCLEX, and it's the hospital's responsibility to train them and to know that they're competent to do so.
I just want to make sure I understand. So in the perfect world of NCLEX, LPNs cannot initiate IVs, touch IVs, any IV business at all?
Now, LPNs can give IV piggybacks, because that is an IV medication, but they can add it to the IV in an IV piggyback. Okay, I take it back on starting IVs. They've changed that. The LPN can start an IV because we teach you that in the School of Nursing. But we do not teach, that's why we do not teach, we do not allow our students to give IV medications until they get into 211. Because there's no LPN. If you pass 211, then you're in the RN program. That's why you cannot give IV medications until you're in 211. It's past the LPN accountability. Okay. So again, this comes from the Alabama Board of Nursing, the Nurse Practice Act. Be responsible and accountable for quality of nursing delivered to patients based on and limited scope of education, LPN or UAP. Demonstrate competence and nursing experience. So what I did to this is try to help you to understand who is the right person, what is the right supervision, the right circumstances, the right task with this one. And I just recently, well, in the fall, so I don't know if any of these have changed. They're still from 2016. Accept individual responsibility and accountability for the assignment of tasks to others. Accept individual responsibility. So you see where Alabama's Nurse Practice Act includes responsibility and accountability, so that there's no mincing words. Proper delegation of nursing care activities. So you always want to make sure that whatever task you assign, that person is competent to provide that task. That's what would scare me or frighten me as someone that's a charge nurse, and again, this psych nurse wants to come and practice med-surg medicine or nursing, and they've been a psych nurse for 20 years, and that would be tough for a charge nurse. Assess individual competency, so that goes back. Are they competent to take care of the patients? But if they give report that they've got a patient that's being discharged to go home, but they're on 10 liters of high flow nasal cannula, and nobody would be going home on 10 liters of high flow nasal cannula. And then the charge nurse has to go look and see if the patient's only on 2 liters of nasal cannula. And again, the complexity of assigned tasks. stable versus unstable, simple tasks to the UAP, and also the health status of the patient, stable versus unstable. So, again, so this is the practice of practical nursing. Acts designed to promote and maintain health, prevention of illness and injury, exercise appropriate nursing judgment, conducting and documenting focused nursing assessment to include the patient's health status. So they cannot do the total nursing assessment on someone like on admission, collecting and documenting data, elements of a comprehensive assessment. Administering medications and treatments when ordered by a legally authorized prescriber, well, that's for all of us. Provision under care, under the direction of a registered nurse, physician, or dentist who considers following elements. And that is always the evaluation of knowledge and skills, the competency of that LPN, the complexity of the assigned task, and the health status of the patient, stable versus unstable. So this goes on, when you're assigning tasks to a UAP, even if, say if it's on the ortho floor, you would want to know that that patient, that person has been, competently trained. So if they were to, it'd be a little bit different if they were having to be, if they were reallocated and they'd never worked the ortho floor. And the reason I say that is the ortho floor, you know, they have a lot of special equipment, and those patients with hip fractures, about turning them, and back surgeries, and so we're going to get more. Finger sticks are not an invasive or sterile procedure within the meaning of these rules. So, unlicensed assisted personnel, it says, may not include tasks that require the exercise of independent nursing judgment or intervention, invasive or sterile procedures. But finger sticks, and now this is in Alabama, finger sticks are not an invasive or sterile procedure in the meaning of these rules. So that's why UAPs can collect finger sticks. They can do peripheral phlebotomy, assist with medications, except for as provided in chapter 60. I hadn't looked at that up. But you know, they've got these assistants now, the medication assistive, what do they call them, MACs?
I think so.
And I don't know what that's about, but, supervision shall be provided to individuals who nursing functions or responsibilities are delegated. The practice of LPN shall be directed by the registered nurse. We already talked about that. So if these medication assistants are giving meds, it must be the same thing that they can give medications like routine medications. I don't know. You know, you think of the meds that are most often given, I guess they could give levothyroxine, they could give Protonics, they could give Tylenol for pain, but they couldn't give furosemide. Why is that? It requires independent judgment to know what that blood pressure is, what that potassium level is. I wouldn't think they could give any of the medications that affect blood pressure, the antihypertensives or the cardiac meds. They could give the aspirin. I guess they could give the statin. I don't know.
Would it be based off of, like, say, if you were in an assisted living, and because those people, other than if they were living at home, they would be taking those medications on their own, it would be something that was routine?
That's true. They would be taking that on their own, but still.
If it was a routine.
Yeah, I could say that, yeah. because that is their home.
Yeah.
So, it's what we call them residents. I don't know, but again, if I was gonna work there and they had those kind of people, I would wanna know what that, because the Alabama Board of Nursing also sets the standards for what those people can do also.
Right.
So I would want it printed out to me so that I would know. So here it is, a licensed facility may develop a standardized procedure as defined, for intravenous therapy by a licensed practical nurse. So that still begs the question, NCLEX. I'm sure on NCLEX, they're not gonna have, that assign an LPN to go in and start an IV. It's going to be something much more, critical thinking, the necessary critical thinking, that, you're assigning, is that patient stable versus unstable, that you're delegating the care to the LPN. That's the biggest thing, is that patient stable or unstable? So when you're answering a question of mine and it asks, which patient could you assign to the LPN, the thing that you want to think of is that patient stable? And does it require any type of IV medication other than an IV PPAP, like antibiotics? But if that person was receiving antibiotics and they were having a reaction to it, what would you have to do?
Get the RN.
Mhm. Whereas we know that's not in the real world. So, the purpose of the Board of Nursing, the main purpose is to, protect the public and, the licensure of nurses and the discipline of nurses. So delegation is the transfer of responsibility for the performance of an activity from one individual to another while retaining accountability for the outcome. Making sure that you're accountable in the delegation to the right person, the right task, under the right circumstances, the right supervision, communication, evaluation. So as a licensed nurse, you know that even though the RN delegates the responsibility for the task completion, the accountability of the outcome or the process remains with the RN. So again, the only thing that I can think of that as a charge nurse, because that's the only person that would be delegating to another RN. But that's not even gonna be in there, but still, in NCLEX, then they transfer that accountability to that RN. They wouldn't lose their license or accountable if something happened to a patient under that RN unless they knew already that that person was not a safe person. But that goes for any nurse. We know that we're supposed to report anyone that's not practicing safe care. So, components of delegation to nursing care, RNs, LPNs, LVNs, licensed vocational nurses, the same thing. UAPs. And again, when you delegate a task, you must continually evaluate care provided by the caregiver, and it's going to be the LPN, UAP, especially the UAP. So for successful delegation, make sure that you follow the State Nurse Practice Act and the facilities policies and procedures. Because again, I gave you the example it's not in the State Nurse Practice Act that you specifically, have to have an employee or a nursing person to, discharge. They are the person that has to take that patient to discharge them. A student cannot do that. It has to be an employee of the facility, and that's at Gadsden Regional. So that is specific for their policies and procedures, but it's not in the State Nurse Practice Act. But there is wording in there that you follow the policies and procedures of a facility. Delegate only tasks for which you have both accountability and responsibility. Follow the state regulations, job descriptions, agency policies. Follow the delegation process and key behaviors for delegating. Again, all the rights. Accept delegation only when you clearly understand the task, time frame, reporting requirements, and other exceptions, expectations. For instance, I've already talked to you about if you are ever, and there's been a lot of reallocating or being pulled on the units now. So before you go, so for instance, they were to pull me to the OB unit. And they have done that before, like scared the heck out of me. Before I accepted the responsibilities, I want to know, hey, what am I going to be responsible for here? Because to them, you know, it's just patient postpartum. Well, no, when I went down there and they told me that, I went in to find out that there was someone being monitored for, she was on a magnesium drip, I think. I won't ever forget it. I'd like to have it come apart. But I had already accepted responsibility for the assignment of that patient. And then when I went in, I thought, you know, I thought they'd all had babies and everything was, you know, cool. And here I come in and they're trying to stop labor on this woman. So, write your fears about delegation and recognize which are realistic, which are not. Well, around here, what do we know, and I don't know if it's like this anywhere else, but if there's an LPN, they're going to get pretty much, well, Brittany, and who else works on med-surg Laura? Do they, when they give you, when the RN delegates to you, do you see that you get any, the more stable patients on the units, or is it pretty much? The same as what an RN would have?
Yeah, it probably should be.
Right, in the perfect world. That's why it used to be, the mobility track would join you guys in the fourth semester. And when we would go over these things and they would test, they would not do well on these delegation questions because they thought about what they actually did compared to what, you know, NCLEX, in the perfect world of NCLEX. So, the RN delegator, the active delegation, supervising the task, assessment, and any intervention or corrective action. Let me ask you, and I don't know if this will ever be, probably will be, who do we have that we can call upon if we have difficulty with some kind of patient that is just out of our hands and we need assistance as nurses? Supervisor. The supervisor has to be an RN and they have to be very well seasoned in nursing, many years of experience, well, I say that. Okay, let's take a break.